Today, we're taking a look at the state of the air forwarding industry with my guest, Brandon Freed. He is Executive Director of the Airforwarders Association. Hello, Brandon.
Hello, Robert. Thank you for having me today.
And thanks for being here. So how have air forwarders weathered the pandemic?
Well, in a robust fashion, I would say. We were at the very beginning, obviously, as everyone else was, we were somewhat taken off guard. But as time progressed, many freight forwarders answered the call, either through facilitating e-commerce, the transportation of personal protection equipment. On the latter part, obviously, the facilitation of transportation of vaccines, essential medical supplies related to the vaccination. So we've had a very robust response. And fortunately, I'm happy to say that our industry is once again optimistic and doing well as a result.
Oh, that's good to know. Certainly an industry that was front and center in terms of transporting the virus, the vaccine and all of the materials that go into it. But at the same time, the air cargo and air freight industry underwent some pretty significant, at least temporary changes. A lot of no more passenger flights for a while there, a lot more being booked on converted passenger planes. How did that affect air forwarders and the business that they're in?
Well, I think that was the biggest shocker of all, is when we saw, half the world's passenger aviation fleet grounded. Mm-hmm. And as a result, the belly capacity that comes along with those flights. And while the air cargo or the all cargo freighters were available, there aren't that many of them to actually answer or respond to the demand and the need. Thankfully, the airline stepped up to the plate and initiated these cargo flights using passenger planes, the freighters, PHFREIGHTERS.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, initially it was boxes and seats. Now many airlines have actually removed the seats and they're just flying boxes. Mm-hmm. And so we have several airline members as part of the Airforwarders Association. Many of them have been flying these flights. As an example, I think United has flown almost 13,000 of them in the last year. American is not far behind, nor is Delta. And others. So we're happy that the airline stepped up and answered the call, even though they weren't flying any passengers.
Well, you still had the belly capacity of those planes at the same time, in addition to the actual seats and in the cabin, right? So
Yep. Actually, initially they were just flying freight in the bellies. It took a while for the FAA here in the United States to give its permission. Mm-hmm. And once it did, they were able to utilize upstairs as well. Obviously, there are several, there are capacity concerns that you have to look at. You've got floor bearing weight issues and distribution issues of cargo upstairs, fire suppression issues, things like that you normally don't have. But, once that got started, we were able to use the airline cargo flights in a very significant fashion, and many of our members were actually chartering these flights on a daily basis.
Yeah, we even heard to the extent like some auto industry companies and chemical companies were chartering some of the giant, the big Antonov freighters too, to fill their fill
yeah.
space.
What's interesting about that is it's amazing how many assets were put into motion. Right. And, freight forwarders, for the most part, I've heard statistics as high as 80% of those shipments are actually managed by freight forwarders. So they were called in to obviously play a significant role, and I'm glad they have. And mm-hmm. That still endures today, even as these passenger planes are starting to roll back into the system gradually.
Yeah. In addition to the materials that the air freight industry has handled traditionally because of, high value stuff, medical stuff, things like that. I'm wondering that given the problem on the ocean side with congestion at ports and rising ocean freight rates, now there's always been a pretty strong line between air and ocean because of the cost gap, the price gap. Yeah. Has that narrowed to the point where some things that were being carried by ocean because of the congestion, because of the pricing situation, might now be eligible and might indeed be going on planes instead?
Sure, absolutely. That the delta between maritime and air freight shipping has been pretty large. But
Mhm.
when you consider this unsurpassed port congestion that we've seen, let's say as an example, at the Port of Los Angeles, we've had 30 ships at a given time waiting for berthing, that type of
Right.
thing. Time is money. And we happen to be, as freight forwarders, as air freight forwarders, we sell time for a living. So, oftentimes we had significant portions of shipments actually being diverted out to the airports because we just didn't have the time to wait. But on the other hand, rates have also gone up on the air freight side as well. But you're dealing with hours as opposed to weeks and in transit time. And when you're dealing with essential supplies like medical equipment or any type of technology that needs to be at the destination, you have no choice but to head out to the airport.
Yeah. You're painting a pretty rosy picture of the industry right now, but like every industry, there are challenges, I'm sure, concerns and worries and things like that. What are some of those things on the minds of air forwarders today that they're concerned about, worried about, or they see as future challenges?
Well, we mentioned port congestions at the maritime ports, but we're also
Mhm.
having significant congestion at the airports as well. And
Right.
that's due to a number of reasons. Most of the gateway airports here in the United States were fashioned or built 40 years ago, and they haven't really had any updating. And that's significantly needed right now. And that's why in the most recent White House proposal for infrastructure investment, we're hoping that the airports get enough money so that they can invest on the cargo side for roads and
Mhm.
buildings and all the things you need to meet today's air cargo demands. We've had trucks waiting at the airports for 8-10 hours, just waiting to either tender cargo or pick cargo up. So obviously that's been a big concern for our industry over the last year. I'll tell you
Yeah.
another concern that we've had in our industry this year, and that's cybercrime. We've never experienced
Oh,
this before. And
interesting.
and now, you're seeing these ransomware attacks and obviously we had some very significant attacks, Forward Air, Marisk, and a few others, and that's something that here at the Airforwarders Association, we've set up a technology committee and we're starting to address it because obviously, this is getting to be a more significant issue as well.
Is it an industry like so many others that has undergone a certain amount of consolidation in recent years to the point where you have these big players and it becomes more difficult for a small or medium-sized entity to survive?
Yeah, so you're seeing a lot of consolidation within the industry, and that's not unusual. We're used to that. But the small to medium sized player still survives. He's still conquers the niche market, provides the personalized service that you see, and he might not be the candidate for a merger or an acquisition yet. The small members that we have, the medium sized members I speak to frequently, and they're busy right now.
Hmm.
And it seems that shippers still want that personalized approach. It's not that they can't get the personalized approach through the larger companies as well, but there are a lot of shippers out there that just wanted to deal with a smaller company.
Yeah. What is the air forwarding landscape going to look like as the pandemic subsides and passengers start filling those seats again? You're back to belly capacity, back to freighter capacity, which I understand was a bit on the wane before this. There had been a lot of airlines getting out of the freighter business entirely. What does it look like in terms of capacity going forward and the ability to make a living under so-called quote unquote normal circumstances?
Yeah. So half the North American capacity is pretty much in the bellies of passenger planes,
Mhm.
and in the United States, we're only seeing I think one airline right now that's flying, one passenger airlines that's flying freighters. I think that's Alaska Airlines right now. So obviously, I would imagine that prices will drop a bit because there'll be more capacity there. But at the same time, you're still going to have the need for urgent shipping. I think that the e-commerce demand the spike of the e-commerce demand has really shown shippers that they don't always have to go out to a store to get something. And air freight has answered the call to that. And I think a lot of freight forwarders are starting to dive into that market much more so than ever before. Now, will that be the domain of the freight forwarder? Probably not. That's probably more the express carriers, but we still
Mhm.
play a role. We stock the distribution centers, and we're there in support. of the industry. And many freight forwarders, by the way, are making acquisitions in the e-commerce space. So it's going to be pretty interesting going forward.
Yeah. So there's a lot of investment, at least ready to happen, maybe, and maybe not during the recession, but you think a lot of air forwarders are positioned to grow and invest, and they are hopeful for the future.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something else. They're making significant investments in automation and technology, much more so than ever before. We're getting rid of paper, and we're hoping that the government, in their requirements, they do the same thing. But I've seen more investment in technology to make the experience transparent for the shipper and easy. You know, our kids nowadays, they love those handheld devices, and the younger people, as they come into their positions of authority, they want that ease of use and that transparency, and freight forwarders are answering the call.
It's a complex industry, and it's one in which it always hasn't been that easy to make a buck. I guess margins can be thin, but it sounds like there's a lot of creativity going out there and a lot of hope in your industry. Brandon Freed of the Airforwarders Association, thanks for sitting down with me for a few minutes to talk about the current state and potential future of the air forwarding industry. Thanks a lot for being with me today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks.